Reflections with theologian Father James Bacik, campus minister and assistant professor of philosophy at Bowling Green State University in Bowling Green, Ohio.
Perhaps a lot of people at times get a little confused because there's so many changes in our modern world. I think in one sense that the problem of faith really is different for people today than it was many years ago, precisely because of the breakdown in our cultural values, because things are not as black and white as they once were. So a good deal of confusion sets in.
Joining Father Bacik in today's reflections is Pam Meserol, a former colleague of Father Bacik at St. Thomas More University Parish in Bowling Green, Ohio. Today's reflections focuses on the topic of the problem of faith. Here's Father Bacik.
Pam, I'm glad you were willing to come onto the program and talk a little bit. I thought we would deal with the problem of faith tonight. In my work, I talk to a lot of people who are having difficulties with their belief system. They begin to call it into question. They have doubts about the religious background that they grew up with. They begin to wonder about whether their church affiliation is proper or not. Some people move to the position of beginning to doubt or question the very existence of God. I talk with people who say they are atheists and that they have long ago rejected that. I deal with some people who say that it really seems childish to them to be a believer and that all of that sounds rather mythological or strange, this idea of there being a God, or that the God became a man and lived among us as Jesus of Nazareth. They say that that is an infantile sort of belief, and they really are not interested in that anymore. And so I think even people who are not really at that severe kind of level of the problem of faith do experience it in other ways in their lives. Perhaps doubts come in. Perhaps they begin to see other styles of living, and they wonder if their own approach and their own attempt to live out their religious tradition is really a correct one or not. And perhaps a lot of people at times get a little confused because there's so many changes in our modern world. I think in one sense that the problem of faith really is different for people today than it was many years ago, precisely because of the breakdown in our cultural values, because things are not as black and white as they once were. So a good deal of confusion sets in. I think that there are a whole bunch of problems that end up causing these difficulties of faith. But I'd like to zero in on one of those, which we often discuss under the heading of pluralism, and that is that in today's world, people have many choices or options, and they can choose various religious traditions. It's very acceptable to choose to be an atheist in many settings. I like to contrast this with a previous age where people sort of grew up in the faith, and that was the only option they knew. They grew up in a Christian neighborhood, Christian family, and it was not really a thinkable kind of option to choose to go in some other direction. Their friends, their family, all supported the religious tradition they grew up in. Now, I think the new situation today is that people really do feel as though they have choices. We can imagine people encountering atheists and saying, well, look, they're pretty nice, and these atheists live a good life, or they're charitable in many ways, and they don't seem to need to go to church or believe in God to be good people. And the believer begins to wonder, well, I don't know if I really need this faith of mine or not. Maybe I don't really need to worship regularly anymore, or I'm not so sure I really believe in God anymore. And it is even possible for a person to choose that and say, well, I'm going to get away from it, and I'm going to adopt an agnostic position, for example, in which I would say, I'm not sure if there is a God or not. So I think that we live in this pluralistic kind of situation, and I suppose in some ways this gets intensified for us as we look at the scene on a college campus. You've spent a number of years in connection with campus life. And I wondered if you see any of this operative there.
Yes, I think I've run into a number of people that were raised in, let's say, a Catholic family with many friends who are Catholic, and they've never run into people who were of a different faith. And then they come to college and they're thrown into a large setting with many people with many faiths, some atheists, some Protestants, Jewish, Catholic, and they don't quite know how to handle all of this. Again, other problems arise because they're not forced to go to church anymore. When they're at home, their parents said, well, you'll go to church on Sunday. Now that they're at school, there's an option there. They don't have to go to church on Sunday. They have to make that decision themselves. Again, they run into options in classes. Philosophy classes, introduction to philosophy class might raise the question, why do you believe in God? Well, that question might not have ever been thrown at them before. Science classes might bring up the topic of evolution, and again, they have to question their faith. Mm-hmm. So they run into many options that they've never had before until they came to the campus.
And therefore, they're forced to make decisions about this. You know,
right.
I see it as sort of their regular set routine gets challenged, doesn't it, in many ways? I often think of the great problems and confusion that can cause to a young person. Very often we see that with freshmen coming to campus, where their secure world in many ways is broken down. It's not just that the faith is challenged, but they have to make a new circle of friends. They have new kinds of challenges. They have harder classes maybe than they ever knew before. They're in a, as you said, in a larger setting. They're in a big university. Before, they walked down the halls of their high school and they knew everyone there, and everything sort of supported their identity. There were many factors in their life that told them who they were and gave them a secure status in life. And so I think that what you said rings true to me. A lot of my counseling experience would tell me that people are really hurting at this time. We get the homesickness phenomenon and the loneliness, and all of those props, those things that supported the faith, get broken down. So I see it very much as a cultural kind of problem too, not just a question of speculative doubt about a particular doctrine, but that there are these various options now available. And the secure props are no longer there. Some authors have described this as a supermarket situation, that the student or the young person, and I don't think it's confined to that, I think that's a good example, but there's many people in our world that feel like they're in a supermarket. They're walking down the aisle, and there are many lifestyles and options available there. It's sort of advertised, and one has a sense, well, I could choose these. That's what I was trying to say before. I think the difference today is that they are choosable. They are what we call viable options today. A person can really entertain the possibility of going in some other direction than the religious faith that they grew up in. And of course, one of those options is atheism. There's a way in which atheism is very respectable today, in which, for example, in a university setting, there's a certain number of people who feel that that's the more mature option, that bright people or with-it people, people who have studied a lot, will choose to be atheists, that it's a more enlightened kind of position. And I think a lot of times when young people run up against that, they really are challenged, as you said, for the first time in dealing with their faith problems. And up till then, it's just been an assumed kind of faith. So the new situation, I think, is one of pluralism, many options that people end up having. I guess that this creates a situation of search, doesn't it? That I think in my classes in the past, I used to get a lot more students who were searching in regards to the faith. They would come into class obviously very open-minded and trying to figure out where they stood religiously and trying to get their heads together, as they would say, in relationship to belief in God and church practices and so on. I'm not sure that I get quite so many students like that anymore. I think there's perhaps new trends that are against this searching thing. Brings to mind the question of the fundamentalists today, or the new conservatism.
Seem to run into a number of people who seem very self-assured about their religion, the fundamentalists, that know exactly what they believe and they try to impress that on other people. As you said, the new conservatism phase.
Yeah. And in other words, your sense is that these people are not really involved in the search.
They seem almost rigid in what they believe. They're no longer searching. You get that term, I found it. They're no longer looking.
Yeah, that's a good phrase. Yeah, that's exactly what you hear. I found it. I've met the Lord. And the question of doubt is really put aside. In fact, a lot of times I think these people don't like to speak about doubt at all. Doubt is no longer a matter of concern to them. They have certitude. They will even say that, won't they? That they have absolute certitude about the faith. Yeah, I do think that this has to be taken into consideration. Not all people today feel as though they're walking down the aisle of a supermarket. Some people are not looking from side to side. They're not even inside the market, I think. They're not searching at all. And they do come across, I think, as you said, in a very assured kind of way. And so the analysis of the problem of faith should not stop just with talk of pluralism and many options. There's also a counter trend that we see, and that many people call the evangelical revival, or the rise of fundamentalism, or the phenomenon of the newborn religious people.
I wonder if this new conservatism phase might come across as being frustrating to those people who are searching. These people who seem to have the answers to come across very self-assured, and those people who are going through some sort of search might find it frustrating, anxiety-producing.
Yes, I think that I have seen that. I think very often the searcher might feel put down by this. Might say, hey, I feel bad here, I don't have it together, and I'm trying to figure it out where I stand with God or with my religious tradition. And here this other person seems to have it all together. They've got the answers. They know where they're going, and they seem to be so happy and joyful about it. And I think very often that is one of the responses of people who are involved in the search. That is, that these other people are better off. They are luckier, and they've found something, and then I think the person is feeling deficient. The searcher is wondering, maybe I don't measure up, maybe something is wrong with me. I think that's one kind of response that we get. But there's probably another response that says, hey, I don't believe this. I mean, this is too good to be true. You're happier than any person ought to be, or your joy seems a little bit false, or maybe you're more assured than I think any human being can be about these great questions that people have pondered for a long time. And I think in that way, maybe your word frustrated might be good. I think that very often the searchers feel frustrated in their dialogue. They feel like they can't talk to those who have all this certitude. They feel like they're in a different ball game somehow, that the ordinary human doubts and so on really are not at work there. So the problem of faith in our culture is really a difficult one. It's not shared by everyone in the same way. For example, there were a number of years ago that people said that this new searching situation would eventually take over everyone, and that all the people in universities or in urban centers or in the Western world would move towards an atheistic position, that more and more that would happen because of this new supermarket situation where there were many options for people, that more intelligent people got, or the more educated, the more experience they had, the more people would choose these atheistic options. But I think that the fact of the matter is that it hasn't worked that way exactly. The strange phenomenon is that we have had this religious revival in recent years. We've had more and more people saying they're born again, more people into this certitude about religion, and people saying that I have been converted, my life has changed, and I'm absolutely sure of it. So we've got those two things side by side, the searchers and those who are born again and have this certitude. I think that maybe the culture produces this kind of reaction. I think we live in a culture in which the ordinary value system has broken down in many ways, and there's a great deal of insecurity. And I think that whenever we have that situation of insecurity, there will be some people latching on to something that is solid. People will be looking for something you can stand on for sure, have assurance about, that you can be absolutely certain about. And I think religion functions that way for many people today. One begins to wonder if one really can have that much certitude about these great mysteries that have been part of our human quest all through the centuries. Pam, we really ought to try to give some responses to this pluralism. We ought to try to think a little bit in terms of what we're going to say about that. And the first thing that strikes me is that this searching situation should be seen as a healthy one, I think. I like the idea of the pluralism, because my main reason for saying that is that our Christian faith, and this goes for the other great religious traditions as well, really is a matter of adult choice. The religions keep saying that we have to respond out of our own unique personality, that we are called to develop our talents and to use our skills, that God calls us by name, and He wants us to choose. It seems as though the best of religion is not something that's just done because we received it from our family, or that we just go through the routines of it, or we do it because we don't know any other way. The Christian religion has always said that it is a matter of dedication to Jesus Christ, of free choice to follow Him, of deciding out of one's own strength to commit oneself to the lifestyle and the teachings and the very person of Jesus of Nazareth. And so in this sense, Christianity really is an adult religion, one that requires free choice and intelligent probing of the various options. And therefore, I take a positive attitude to the supermarket situation. I say, that's fine. That's good to know there's options. It's good to have our childhood faith challenged. It means that we need to learn about it, to investigate the options, check them out, and to try to make intelligent kinds of decisions.
Do you think because these options are available, people might tend to leave the church more so than they did in the past?
Well, I think so, yes. I think the fact of the matter is that religions are going to lose out in some way. As soon as you have freedom and many options, statistically, things are going to be against us. I think in the long run, people will end up belonging to particular religious traditions because they choose to, and not just because they want to live a life of conformity, or because it's socially acceptable, or because their family taught them that way. Fewer and fewer people will do that, I believe, in the modern world. And therefore, I just believe that statistically we will lose people. In the Catholic community, our percentage of Mass attendance has gone down drastically in the last decade or so. We've lost something like 20%, I think, on the average Mass attendance. And I don't find that surprising at all. It means that people feel free to go in other directions, and they're going to be there more and more because they want to be. But again, I consider that to be positive. I think the Christian community will be strengthened by the fact that people are going there because they want to, because they have freely decided that this is good for them, that it helps them to understand their life better, or helps them to live more responsibly and nobly. Once they decide that, then I think they're going to be better members of that community. The same thing for the atheistic option. I think as long as it's viable, as long as there are important people in the culture holding it, as long as you have role models of good people who choose that, I think more and more people are going to say, hey, that fits me. What does belief in God really add to my situation? So I think in answer to your question, yes, we're going to lose more people. But again, I wouldn't turn the clock back. I wouldn't say, let's go back to another situation where we have a more rigid structure and where you've got to do it this way. Let's keep people out of the supermarket. Don't let them know about the options. Try to keep them at home and under wraps and so on. I believe that this really would be a big mistake. I think rather the proper approach is to say, okay, there's options. Let's investigate them. Let's see how it stands with those options. Let's know their background and history and tradition. Look at your own religious heritage, and then try to make some intelligent choices about it.
How would you deal with parents whose children have optioned out of the faith that they've raised their children with?
Thinking that parents, you mean, would be or end up being very upset about
Possibly,
it.
yeah.
Well, that is a good question, and I run into it a lot of times with parents talking to me about their youngsters who have gone in different directions. I think that one of the most important things to suggest to parents is that they look at the quality of life of their youngsters. I think a lot of times when they have chosen to go in another direction, they actually seem to be living better lives, or it might even improve their life because they've freely chosen it. And I think that parents should try to put that into perspective. I know I deal with parents who sometimes say, well, if my youngster left their Catholic heritage, then I'm afraid they're going to be damned to hell forever. Or you find people in the Protestant denomination saying the same thing if their youngsters go in a different direction. I believe that needs to be challenged. I think theologically we have to remember that salvation is in God's hands, that God can save people outside of the set religious traditions, and that God is a merciful and loving God. I think we have to give people the benefit of the doubt when they choose other religious options, and to start out with the premise, yes, they are acting honestly, they're following their conscience, they've made the choice that seems best for them. So we give them the benefit of the doubt, and if indeed they are following their conscience, then we have to believe that God is with them, that God will save them despite the fact that they have rejected what they grew up with. So I would try to calm the parents in that sense. And I think I would also suggest to the parents that if they want their offspring to continue in their own tradition, one of the best things they can do is to be a good example. I think it would be foolhardy for parents to reject their youngsters at that stage and to say, I won't have anything to do with you anymore because you've dropped out of the faith we gave you as a youngster. I think the charity should prevail here, and that is, it would be a great witness, a continuing effort to dialogue, to be kind, to understand the viewpoint of their youngsters. I believe that this really would be a good thing for them to do, to try fundamentally to be charitable. So in all those ways, I would try to put it into perspective to them. Now, they're not going to be happy about it. I think any parent who feels strongly that their faith is worthwhile is going to want to share it with the next generation. And they say, I got something out of it, I want to give it to them. But I think we have to remember that indeed there are going to be other options. I often tell parents you could be the best parents in the world. You could send them to the best schools, give them the best religious training, and statistically we are going to continue to lose a good number. You could do everything perfectly, and one of your children may decide to go in another direction, to no fault of your own. So I try to help parents to get over guilt feelings about all of this.
The other side of this would be, how should parishes deal with people who want to come into the church or are searching for a church to belong to?
How we would try to respond. Well, I think that one thing, that parishes ought to be welcoming kinds of communities. I think we ought to be places where people would feel at home. We ought to be willing to teach classes about what it is that we hold. I think that we are not really in the business of trying to convert other people. I think in our ecumenical age, it doesn't make sense to go out to other people who are comfortable in their own religious tradition and try to pull them out of that and disturb them and to bring it into our own. But on the other hand, people who are involved in the honest search, we should be ready for them. We should be saying, hey, you're welcome to come and worship with us. We'll explain to you our faith. That's part of being a good Christian, is being able to witness, I think, to one's own faith. I know, Pam, that in the middle of your own collegiate career, you made some choices along this line, and I wondered if you found at that time anything particular that helped you and encouraged you.
I think when I attended the parish, I found the first thing that attracted me was the community, the sense of community there, feeling welcome. I got involved with a number of activities there, and then later on I ended up becoming Catholic. I think, as I said, the community sense was most important at that time.
And other people who would make you feel welcome and part of it.
And then later on I took classes to find out, but I think the initial response of the parish was important.
I think that this probably has always been the key throughout Christian history of making people welcome. We have the traditional statement, well, see how they love one another, as being the great enticement to join the group. See, they really do try to live out a life of charity. And so I think that that is really the key element in all of it. And I would be happy, for you to say that our parish somehow helped with that and enabled you to make an adult choice at that time. I think your point about classes afterwards would be important. It would seem to me to be education has to be part of it. I don't think people should join a new grouping without knowing what it's all about, without experiencing all sides of it and hearing what the group is really all about. And so a parish needs to run educational programs, I think, to end up helping people. Pam, we've been talking about this whole question of faith. Faith really is a problem for a lot of people today. It represents difficulty, and a number of people are involved in doubts, and there surely are people around who are searching. There's others who feel very confident of their faith and don't feel any need to search anything new out. But for the searchers, we have to have a certain sympathy. We have to say, hey, doubt is all right. A little bit of confusion in life is part of being human, and we can turn it to our advantage. And so I don't want to put over a protective veil over these people. I want to say, okay, I'll be with you as you search. We'll try to offer you educational opportunities to help you to do it well. And we'd like to have sort of a welcoming kind of community for you to come into, where you can be active and involved. But fundamentally, the pluralism of our modern world should be a positive thing because it enables us to make adult decisions about the faith that we want to belong to.
You've been listening to Reflections with your host, theologian Father James Bacik, campus minister and assistant professor of philosophy at Bowling Green State University in Bowling Green, Ohio. Joining Father Bacik in this discussion was Pam Meseral, a former colleague of Father Bacik at St. Thomas More University Parish in Bowling Green, Ohio. The topic of this week's Reflections was the problem of faith. If you have any questions about today's program or any ideas for topics you'd like to hear discussed, please write to Reflections in care of WLQR, Toledo, Ohio, 43623. Produced in the studios of WLQR, Reflections is directed by Mark Ferguson. Executive producer is Mary Beth Kirchner. Reflections is brought to you by the Genesis Radio Network.